Have you ever wondered why so many men, good men, end up walking alone for years? Not because they want to, but because something inside them has broken. Something the modern world has slowly drained from their spirit. Men today are not avoiding love because they hate women. They're avoiding it because they've learned that vulnerability has become dangerous. They've seen loyalty turned into leverage, kindness mistaken for weakness, and effort met with silence. Somewhere along the line, the game changed, and many men decided they would rather stand alone than keep losing pieces of themselves, trying to be enough for someone who never truly saw them. There was a time when men pursued love with pride. They saw commitment as a sacred act, not a transaction. But now so many feel like no matter how much they give, it's never enough. They're told to be strong, but sensitive, dominant, but gentle, confident, but humble. And when they finally show up as all those things, they're still left behind. The confusion runs deep. The exhaustion runs deeper. And so, quietly, men step back. They stop protecting their peace instead of chasing affection. They stop explaining themselves. They stop reaching out. They disappear into their work, their gym sessions, their solitude. Not because they've given up on love, but because love has stopped feeling safe. The truth is uncomfortable, but it needs to be said. Many men stay single for years, not because they don't want connection, but because modern dynamics have made trust feel impossible. They see relationships that look more like power struggles than partnerships. They see loyalty replaced by options and depth replaced by attention. They watch as sincerity is dismissed as boring and manipulation is praised as confidence. And the worst part, when men speak up about it, they're told to man up, to stop complaining, to keep giving without asking for understanding in return. So they stay silent. They build walls instead of bridges. They love in private but protect in public. They keep their emotions buried where no one can reach them. But beneath that silence, there's still a fire. There's still a man who wants to be seen for his heart, not just his value. A man who wants connection without games, honesty without fear, and peace without having to fight for it every day. That man still exists in millions, maybe even in you. And if you've ever felt like you're losing hope in relationships, this message is for you. Because what's happening right now is not the end of love. It's the rebirth of self-respect. Men are not becoming colder, they're becoming wiser. They're realizing that not every woman deserves access to their loyalty, their time, or their energy. They're learning that walking alone for a while can be far more powerful than walking with someone who keeps dimming your light. Stay with this message because this isn't about blame. It's about awakening. It's about reclaiming your power as a man in a world that's tried to make you doubt your worth. If you've ever felt unseen, misunderstood, or unappreciated, you're not alone. The path forward isn't bitterness, it's clarity. It's strength. It's self-mastery. By the end of this journey, you'll understand exactly why stepping back from the chaos was never weakness. It was your evolution. Every man reaches a point where he stops chasing validation and starts chasing peace. That's when everything begins to change. You stop asking why people don't see your worth and start asking why you needed their approval in the first place. You begin to realize that most of your pain didn't come from rejection. It came from ignoring your own intuition. It came from giving your best to people who never planned to stay. It came from believing that being a good man automatically meant you'd be loved in return. But life doesn't reward blind loyalty, it rewards alignment. The moment you align your energy with truth instead of expectation, you stop being used. You stop being drained. You stop bleeding for people who only showed up to take, not to build. The silence you once feared becomes your sanctuary. You start feeling stronger in your own company than you ever did in anyone else's presence. You begin to notice how peaceful it feels not to explain yourself, not to chase attention, not to perform for affection. That stillness that once felt empty now feels sacred. It's where your confidence rebuilds itself. It's where you remember who you were before the disappointment, before the heartbreak, before the world convinced you that you had to prove your value. When a man rediscovers that version of himself, he becomes untouchable. He stops competing. He stops comparing. He becomes a force of calm power, disciplined, grounded, and impossible to manipulate. This is the phase where many men misunderstand their transformation. They mistake emotional detachment for strength, when in truth, real strength isn't about closing off. It's about opening selectively. You don't have to stop caring. You just have to stop caring for the wrong people. You don't have to stop loving. You just have to stop loving where it's not reciprocated. True masculinity isn't cold, it's controlled. It's the ability to feel deeply without letting those feelings destroy your direction. And that's what so many men are finally learning, that their worth doesn't depend on who chooses them, but on how they choose themselves. There's something powerful that happens when a man no longer seeks comfort in attention. His energy shifts, he becomes magnetic in ways words can't explain. Women who once overlooked him suddenly feel drawn to his presence, not because he's trying, but because he's finally free from needing. That's the paradox. When you stop chasing love, you attract a higher form of it. When you stop begging to be seen, your authenticity becomes impossible to ignore. When you stop proving your worth, you start living it. That's when you realize the real problem was never that you weren't enough. It's that you were trying to be enough for people who never valued depth in the first place. And this is where men must rise differently, not through anger, but through awareness. Not by rejecting women, but by refusing to compromise their integrity. The modern world has confused dominance with disrespect and confidence with arrogance, but real masculinity has nothing to prove. It doesn't shout, it doesn't chase, it doesn't beg. It simply stands tall in truth. A man who understands his own worth no longer fears being single. He sees it as a season of sharpening, not suffering. He learns that solitude isn't punishment, it's preparation. And when he walks back into the world with that kind of clarity, he no longer hopes to be chosen, he becomes the one who chooses. The moment a man stops living for external approval, he begins living with internal authority. That's the shift that separates boys from men, followers from leaders, seekers from masters of their own destiny. Most men today aren't broken because they're weak. They're broken because they've been conditioned to attach their value to how much they can give others while completely forgetting how to give to themselves. They've been taught to earn, love, instead of embody worth. But when a man wakes up to that truth, he stops asking, what do I need to do to be loved? And starts asking, who do I need to become so that I never have to beg for it again? That's when everything changes. This awakening doesn't come from pride, it comes from pain. It's born in the moments when you've given your all and still found yourself standing alone. But that's where power is born, in the silence after disappointment, in the emptiness that forces you to rebuild yourself piece by piece. You realize that the strength you were searching for in others was always buried within you. You start to understand that your peace was never supposed to be dependent on someone else's consistency. Every man must face that reality if he ever wants to lead his own life. You can't build a foundation on uncertainty. You can't find peace in someone who hasn't found it within themselves. Modern relationships often crumble because they are built on the illusion of constant satisfaction. Everyone wants the benefits of connection without the discipline of commitment. People crave intensity but fear responsibility. And men, in their hunger to feel needed, often become the emotional providers in a world that no longer values emotional truth. They pour into people who don't pour back, hoping effort will be enough to awaken appreciation. But you can't awaken gratitude in someone who's asleep in entitlement. You can't teach depth to someone addicted to attention. That's why so many men withdraw, not because they stopped caring, but because they finally saw the imbalance for what it was. The shift that follows is profound. When you stop chasing the wrong kind of validation, your standards rise naturally. You begin to filter your energy like it's gold, because you understand what it costs to give it away freely. You start respecting your time, your focus, your peace, and that's when life starts respecting you back. Women who operate from authenticity, who value depth and stability, begin to notice you differently, not as a man desperate for attention, but as a man anchored in purpose. The masculine energy that once felt drained begins to radiate power again. You no longer need to impress anyone. Your energy speaks louder than words ever could. What men are experiencing today isn't the death of connection. It's the recalibration of it. It's a return to principles, to truth, to self-mastery. Men are learning that the foundation of any healthy relationship starts with emotional independence, because only a man who can stand alone can love without losing himself. Only a man who knows his worth can give without resentment. Only a man who respects his boundaries can build something lasting and real. This is not withdrawal from love, it's evolution through wisdom. And when a man evolves, everything around him either rises with him or fades away. When a man finally understands his worth, the world begins to treat him differently. Not because people suddenly change, but because he no longer tolerates what he once accepted. He stops giving his energy to those who drain him. He stops defending himself to those who misunderstand him. He no longer begs for clarity from people who thrive on confusion. That shift in boundaries is where his strength truly comes alive. It's not anger that drives him anymore, it's awareness. Awareness of who he is, what he stands for, and what he will no longer allow into his peace. That awareness becomes his quiet confidence, his armor, his new standard. And that's when the world starts to notice, not because he demands attention, but because he commands respect. Respect is born from alignment. When your actions reflect your truth, your energy becomes magnetic. You don't need validation when your presence speaks louder than words. You walk differently, speak differently, move differently. You stop chasing temporary highs and start building permanent foundations. You understand that the same energy you used to waste trying to be understood could be used to create the life you deserve. And when that realization hits, everything changes. You no longer look outward for peace, you build it inward. You no longer crave attention. You attract it naturally through discipline, through consistency, through the quiet strength that only comes from mastering yourself. But the world doesn't easily accept a man who's found peace. It will try to provoke him, challenge him, question his calm. People will call it arrogance when it's really self-control. They'll call it indifference when it's really focus. Because a peaceful man cannot be manipulated, and that threatens those who depend on chaos. That's why so many men are labeled cold or unavailable when they finally choose solitude over toxicity. But peace isn't cold, it's clarity. It's the realization that chaos isn't passion, it's distraction. A real man doesn't need drama to feel alive. He feels alive in purpose, in progress, in presence. This era is teaching men that emotional control is not suppression, it's power. To feel everything but still choose logic. To experience pain but not become bitter. To face rejection but still move with dignity. That's emotional strength. That's what separates leaders from followers, builders from wanderers. The men who master that balance don't just survive, they thrive. They create from focus, not fear. They love from choice, not dependency. They rise because they understand that every challenge, every heartbreak, every silence was never meant to destroy them. It was meant to shape them. And when a man begins to see life through that lens, nothing can shake him. He no longer blames the world for what it took from him. He thanks it for what it taught him. Every disappointment becomes data. Every betrayal becomes direction. Every ending becomes evolution. That's how men rise, through awareness, through accountability, through self-respect. The more they refine themselves, the clearer they see who truly belongs in their life. And that clarity doesn't just change their relationships, it changes their destiny. Because a man who has mastered himself no longer looks for peace in the arms of another. He becomes peace itself. The greatest transformation a man can experience is when he no longer seeks to be understood, but to understand himself. That's when the noise around him starts to fade and the truth inside him begins to rise. You realize that every distraction, every rejection, every moment of being overlooked was preparing you to stop searching for love in places that could never give it. You start to see how much time you wasted trying to convince others of your value instead of embodying it. The validation you once chased becomes irrelevant because your standards have outgrown the need for permission. That's the quiet revolution of a man who's awakened to his own worth. He doesn't need the world to see him because he finally sees himself. The masculine heart was never meant to be numb. It was meant to be disciplined. There's a difference between being cold and being composed. When you learn to feel without being ruled by feeling, you reclaim control over your energy. You start to notice how rare peace is in a world addicted to chaos. You stop entertaining people who mistake your kindness for weakness. You stop trying to fix people who don't want to heal. You stop negotiating your standards just to keep someone close. The truth is, peace isn't free. It costs every version of you that tolerated less than you deserved. And when you finally pay that price, the reward is a level of strength that cannot be faked. There's something magnetic about a man who's no longer at war with himself. His silence feels steady, not empty. His confidence feels earned, not forced. He doesn't need to prove his dominance because his presence already commands respect. That's what real power looks like. It's quiet, consistent, and self-assured. The kind of power that doesn't need to chase because it already attracts what aligns. You begin to realize that your life doesn't change when someone finally chooses you. It changes when you finally choose yourself. Every decision you make from that mindset creates momentum. Momentum toward growth, toward peace, toward purpose. That's when you stop living reactively and start living intentionally. But make no mistake, this path isn't easy. Growth will isolate you before it empowers you. You'll lose people who only loved your old version. You'll face silence from those who once praised your effort. You'll see how quickly attention fades when you stop performing for it. Yet that's exactly how you know you're evolving, when your circle gets smaller but your vision gets sharper. You stop needing to be liked because you've learned to be respected by the only person who truly matters, yourself. That self-respect becomes your compass. It guides you away from drama, away from dependency, away from everything that drains your spirit. The man who reaches this stage no longer blames women, society, or circumstance for his solitude. He understands that peace requires protection, and not everyone deserves access to it. He's not avoiding connection. He's filtering for alignment. He knows that love is not supposed to feel like anxiety. It's supposed to feel like home. Until he finds that energy, he remains grounded in himself, focused on becoming a man of depth, not distraction. Because the truth is, the longer you walk alone, the more you realize solitude was never loneliness. It was your soul preparing you for something greater. The longer a man walks alone, the clearer he sees the world for what it is. The illusions begin to fade, the false promises, the shallow connections, the temporary highs that once felt like love, but were only distractions. Solitude sharpens vision. It strips away every lie he was taught about what makes him valuable. It shows him that his worth isn't found in who desires him, but in how deeply he understands his own direction. The man who learns to be alone doesn't lose hope in love. He simply stops confusing attachment with connection. He stops mistaking attention for affection. He stops trying to fit into spaces that were never designed to hold his depth. There comes a moment when a man realizes that the real battle was never against others. It was always against his own lack of clarity. The weakness wasn't that he cared too much. It was that he gave too freely without discernment. His strength was never lost. It was scattered. Every disappointment, every heartbreak, every betrayal was simply a mirror reflecting where he had abandoned his own boundaries. But once he sees that truth, everything shifts. He starts rebuilding his life not from emotion but from principle. He starts choosing discipline over desire, purpose over pleasure, and truth over temporary comfort. That's the moment he becomes unstoppable. Not because he's hardened, but because he's awakened. An awakening doesn't make a man bitter. It makes him focused. He no longer entertains people who drain his energy. He no longer argues with those committed to misunderstanding him. He no longer lowers his standards to keep someone who was never meant to stay. His peace becomes sacred, his silence becomes strategic, and his actions become intentional. Every move he makes carries weight because it's aligned with who he's becoming. And when a man reaches that level of awareness, he's no longer searching for validation. He's building legacy. He's not living to be chosen. He's living to be remembered for his strength, his discipline, and his truth. But what makes this transformation truly powerful is that it's not driven by ego. It's driven by evolution. He doesn't hate women. He simply refuses to lose himself for love. He doesn't isolate from the world. He simply chooses peace over performance. He doesn't stop feeling. He just learns to feel without falling apart. That's what maturity looks like. Emotional depth with spiritual control. It's not about detachment. It's about direction. It's knowing when to give and when to guard. It's mastering the art of being both gentle and unshakable. That balance is what separates men who wander from men who lead. And through that transformation, something profound happens. His energy changes. People can sense his stability before he even speaks. His calm becomes contagious. His presence inspires trust. Women who once chased chaos now find themselves drawn to his peace. But he no longer seeks to impress. He simply exists in truth. Because he's learned that the most attractive thing a man can be is self-assured. Not in arrogance, but in authenticity. Not in dominance, but in direction. And that's when he finally understands the purpose of his solitude. It was never about being alone. It was about becoming whole. Wholeness changes everything. When a man becomes whole, he no longer operates from a place of need. He operates from abundance. He no longer searches for completion through someone else. He creates it within himself. That kind of energy can't be faked, and it can't be shaken. It radiates calm, clarity, and quiet strength. It's the energy of a man who has faced his pain, learned from it, and transformed it into power. He doesn't fear rejection anymore because he understands that rejection is simply redirection toward alignment. He doesn't crave constant reassurance because his confidence comes from truth, not attention. When a man reaches that level of self-ownership, he stops living reactively and starts living intentionally. He no longer moves based on emotion, he moves based on purpose. A man who's whole sees relationships differently. He no longer views love as something to fill a void, but as something to share from overflow. He values peace over pleasure, substance over appearance, connection over control. He understands that real love isn't found through chasing, it's found through alignment. And alignment only happens when two people have done their own inner work. That's why so many men are stepping back now, not to avoid love, but to protect it from being reduced to games, ego, and emotional chaos. They're no longer willing to lose their direction just to feel desired. They've learned that no amount of attention is worth sacrificing their self-respect, because love without respect isn't love. It's dependency dressed as devotion. That realization brings a different kind of freedom. The freedom to walk away without resentment. The freedom to say no without guilt. The freedom to protect your peace without needing anyone's permission. This kind of freedom doesn't make you colder. It makes you clearer. You start to see how much of your old life was built on fear, fear of being alone, fear of not being enough, fear of missing out. But when you rise above that fear, you stop being controlled by it. You start operating from power instead of pain. Every choice becomes intentional. Every boundary becomes sacred. Every action becomes a reflection of who you truly are, not who you're trying to please. And in that clarity, something extraordinary happens. Love finds its true meaning again, not the version sold through screens or celebrated through superficial validation, but the real thing, love that is calm, consistent, and rooted in respect, the kind of love that doesn't demand you to prove yourself, but allows you to be yourself, the kind that doesn't drain your energy, but multiplies it. But that love can only be recognized by a man who is healed. Because until you heal, you'll keep mistaking intensity for intimacy and chaos for chemistry. Healing allows you to see beyond attraction and into alignment. It helps you understand that true love doesn't start with someone else, it starts with how you treat yourself. The men who are single today are not lost, they're evolving. They're learning to build peace before partnership, to master solitude before sharing space, to become whole before becoming one. And that's the highest form of maturity. Because the man who needs nothing is the man who attracts everything real, not through force, not through fear, but through authenticity. He doesn't chase love anymore. He becomes the kind of man love can't ignore.